There was once a reckless young man named David who inherited a massive fortune from his parents. He spent his days throwing wild parties and surrounding himself with friends and women who enjoyed his wealth. One morning, after a particularly crazy party, David woke up feeling terribly sick. He vomited several times and realized that none of his friends had stayed back to ensure he was okay. As he sat on the bathroom floor, he felt lonelier than ever. His parents were no more, he had no siblings, and his so called friends clearly flocked around him only for their selfish gains. A strange longing crept over him. He wanted someone who would care for him for who he was, not for what he had. But marriage was out of the question because David did not believe in love. A child, he thought to himself, but he laughed it off because he knew it was impossible. David was sterile. Years ago, after one of his many careless one-night stands, he had contracted chlamydia. By the time he sought treatment, the infection had already damaged his reproductive system, leaving him unable to have children. The realization of how his poor decisions had ruined his life overwhelmed him, and he burst into tears. Then, out of the blue, he did something he hadn't done in many years. He prayed, "God, if you fix my body, I'll make a donation to the church," he pleaded, repeating the words over and over, clinging to the hope that God would see his desperation. 2 days later, during his usual health checkup, David, in faith, asked the doctor to examine his reproductive system. In his heart, he hoped that God had performed a miracle. That evening, the doctor called him with the results. "I'm sorry, Mr. David. There is no change. You will not be able to have children." After the call, David burst into tears again. "Of course, God will not help someone like me," he said amidst his sobs. But God had a different plan for him. Weeks later, David received an unexpected call from a hospital. A woman named Clara had asked to see him urgently. David was shocked to hear her name after so many years, but went to the hospital out of curiosity. There, he found Clara pale and frail, lying on a hospital bed. The doctor explained that Clara had cancer and was in the final days of her life. David felt sympathy for her, but couldn't understand why she had asked to see him, especially since he had treated her poorly during their short relationship years ago. "We have a 4-year-old daughter," Clara said weakly. As briefly as she could, she explained that after their affair, she realized she was pregnant. Not wanting to have anything to do with him, she had successfully raised the baby on her own. But now, as her illness worsened, she thought their daughter, Rose, needed to know her father. David was shocked. Now that his miracle was here, he couldn't believe God had come through for someone like him. Over the next, it was the only gift he felt he could give her. Every day, Clara's friend would bring Rose to the hospital. David always looked at Rose with love. She quickly became his favorite part of the day. They clicked so easily, and every time he held her in his arms, he felt blessed to be holding his own miracle in flesh. After Clara passed away, David became Rose's full-time guardian. His life changed completely. He gave her the best clothes, toys, and even enrolled her in a great school. His days now revolved around work and his daughter, not parties or wild living. However, his old friends weren't happy with the new David. They missed the carefree David who spent lavishly at clubs and unnecessary events. "Dave, you're acting funny. I have 3 kids, and I'm not as boring as you," his friend Joe told him one day. David ignored the comment. Although he sometimes missed his party days, he was enjoying the new life he had created for himself. One day, As David returned home from school with Rose in his arms, his neighbor called out to him. David was surprised. It was a luxury estate where people minded their own business, and he had always felt that this particular neighbor and her husband despised him because of his previous wayward lifestyle. "Wow, such a pretty girl," the woman, whose name was Elsie, commented. David walked toward his gate to speak to her. They greeted and introduced themselves, and David told her that Rose was his daughter. Elsie played with Rose, who cheerfully smiled back. Just as David was about to head inside, Elsie said to him, "You have such a precious gift. I hope God blesses me with a child someday." David saw how her expression immediately turned sad. He felt sympathy, having been in her position before. Agreeing with her in faith, he stayed a bit longer so Elsie could play with Rose. In the days that followed, whenever David and Elsie bumped into each other after school runs, she would play with Rose by his gate. Over time, she invited David inside to meet her husband Henry, and slowly they became family friends. One evening, David received a call from Joe. "Where are you, David? The event has started." David was confused. He had already told Joe he wouldn't attend his birthday party since it was at night and Rose's nanny would have gone home for the day. But Joe insisted, "Dude, it's not a club event. It's just a small gathering. I always show up to your events." Realizing Joe was right, David sat silently for a while, thinking about what to do with Rose. Suddenly, he remembered Elsie and Henry. He knew they would love to spend time with Rose, but he wasn't sure about the timing. Deciding quickly, he rushed over to them and explained his situation. They agreed to keep her for a few hours. Relieved, David left for the party, intending to return in about 2 hours. However, he was wrong. When he arrived, he realized the couple became confused. "Haven't we paid enough to contact the child we want?" they asked. The man shook his head. That was only the first step. He then took a long look at Rose, who was absent-mindedly playing in the corner of the living room. "What a coincidence that this child is here today. We can use her to reach out to your unborn children." The couple immediately refused. "She's our neighbor's child," they said. The spiritualist assured them no harm would come to Rose. He explained he would give her something to swallow, which would make her unconscious, and they would pray while she entered the spirit world to do the needful. However, he was lying. The substance was merely a concoction to make someone sleep, and he wanted to exploit the couple's desperation to extract more money. Back at the party, David was preparing to leave when Joe loudly teased him. "Where's the latest nanny in town headed? The party hasn't even started." The crowd laughed, and others who knew the old David joined in. Embarrassed and feeling his ego bruised, David decided to stay longer to prove himself. He stepped outside and called Henry. "There's heavy traffic," David lied. "It might be best if I stay at a hotel tonight to avoid driving late." Henry, who answered on speaker, looked at Elsie, who gave him a thumbs up. "Don't worry," Henry told David. "Rose is asleep and safe with us." As soon as Henry hung up, the spiritualist said, "What other sign do you need? Everything is aligning in your favor." The couple hugged each other, crying tears of desperation and hope. It had been a long, painful journey of childlessness, and their judgment was clouded. Finally, they gave the spiritualist the go-ahead. Rose was given the concoction and fell asleep as planned. The prayers began, and the spiritualist assured them that Rose had begun her journey to find their missing children. After the prayers, the spiritualist instructed Elsie and Henry to let Rose rest because she would need all the sleep she could gather to be healthy the next day. The couple followed his orders, sending the spiritualist a huge amount to appreciate his work. As they placed Rose on the bed, she opened her eyes slightly before drifting back to sleep. The couple felt relieved and happy that no harm had come to the child and went to bed. However, what they did not know was that later that night, Rose slipped into a coma as her body reacted poorly to the concoction. The following morning, David arrived at his neighbor's home to pick up Rose. As he waited, he heard scattered footsteps and panicked voices from upstairs. Moments later, Henry rushed down the stairs holding Rose in his arms, with Elsie following closely behind. David immediately took his daughter from them, and they all rushed to the car and headed to the hospital. "Your baby is in a coma. I hope we can save her," the doctor informed David grimly. He asked David questions that might help in treating Rose while waiting for her lab results. The doctor also questioned Elsie and Henry. Out of fear, the couple denied knowing anything about what had happened to Rose. However, Elsie was not strong at heart. She went to a corner where she thought no one could hear her and called the spiritualist, explaining that the substance he had given the girl had made her unconscious. Fortunately, the doctor overheard the conversation and privately alerted David, who immediately called the police. The police arrived, arrested the couple, and took them away for questioning. Now David was left all alone with Rose. He began to weep as the doctor gave him little hope. "I don't know what to say, David. She was brought in very late," the doctor said somberly. David called his friend Joe for comfort. Joe offered support, but eventually said, "Bro, I have to go. My kids need me now. My wife had to watch them all night while I was out. I can't let her handle everything. Family comes first, man." David felt foolish listening to Joe prioritize his family. If only he had done the same for Rose. The next days were incredibly tough for David. He showed up at the hospital every day, praying for Rose, talking to her as if she could hear him, reading her favorite bedtime stories, and even telling her jokes, hoping to bring her some comfort. Then one day, just as unexpectedly and miraculously as she had entered his life, Rose opened her eyes and woke up. David was overjoyed and felt honored that God had given him a second chance. But he knew there was still work to be done. He distanced himself from his old friends and completely let go of his reckless lifestyle. He sold his luxury mansion and moved into a smaller but still comfortable apartment, one that allowed him to focus on Rose's well-being. As the years passed, David often marveled at how one small child had transformed his reckless existence into a life filled with purpose and meaning. Thank you for watching today's story. As we approach the holiday season, I want to wish you all a Merry Christmas in advance. This is a time for joy, celebration, and creating beautiful memories. However, it's also important to stay vigilant. Someone I know often says, "Many are mad, but few are roaming," meaning that untreated mental health issues can be hidden. Please keep a close watch on your children and ensure they are safe, protected, and surrounded by positive influences. The holidays are precious, so let's make them both enjoyable and secure. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and let me know in the comments what you learned. Until next time, take care and goodbye.